people still joining, but we'll begin so everybody can hear as much from Kit as possible in this hour and a half. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this Training Tuesday. My name is Natasha Bothan, and I am the Employee and Organizational Development Manager. The Employee and Organizational Development team is here to assist all of you as employees of the state with any trainings, developmental needs that you might have. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're excited that you're here to join us today. We invite you to join us for every Training Tuesday, which happen every third Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Central Time. You can go out to the BHR website to view what the next Training Tuesday sessions will be as far as topics go and register. Today's speaker would love to see your face if you are able to share your screen. We do ask that you do put your microphones on mute, but if you are able, he'd love to be able to see your smiling faces. Our speaker today is Kit Welchlin. Kit grew up on a hog and dairy farm in southern Minnesota and began speaking at the age of 9 in a 4-H public speaking contest. At age 21,
Natasha,
yes.
that was public speaking. I began public speaking at the age of 9. I was babbling and saying other things when I was little. But
oh my gosh. Oh, I can't read in front of people. I can see my face. Does anybody else have that trouble when you can see your face in your reading? It is bad. Okay, let me start over, everybody. Regroup. Kit grew up on a hog farm and a dairy farm in southern Minnesota and began public speaking at the age of 9 in a 4-H public speaking contest. At age 21, he purchased his first manufacturing company, and by the age of 26, served as CEO and chairman of the board of 3 manufacturing companies in 3 states. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in speech communication, business administration, and political science. He received a master's degree in speech communication and business administration. In 1991, Kit started Welchlin Communication Strategies and Seminars on Stress, providing speeches and seminars to private and public organizations. Kit taught part-time for 26 years in the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, where he received the Teaching Excellence Award and has been repeatedly nominated as outstanding faculty. He is a professional member of the National Speakers Association and has earned the Certified Speaking Professional designation. In 2024, Kit was inducted into the Minnesota Speakers Association Hall of Fame. In 2020, Kit earned the Certified Virtual Presenter designation from eSpeakers. He has delivered more than 3,500 speeches and seminars to more than 500,000 people. If you would please welcome Kit for this morning's session.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for that flattering introduction. My goodness, after an introduction like that, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. And please send that to me so the next time somebody says, "Hey, who do you think you are?" I have something to tell them. Thank you very much. Great to be working with you. A couple of things I'd like to clarify as we get started. Natasha mentioned that I began public speaking at the age of 9. That was not out of desire. That was out of necessity. You see, when I grew up on that hog and dairy farm in southern Minnesota, I was the youngest of 4 sons, no sisters. And I grew up in a position-centered family, not a person-centered family where everyone would have an equal say or an equal vote. No, there was a true hierarchy in the family where my dad had the most authority, then my mom, and then it went from oldest to youngest, and I was the youngest. So what would happen around the dining room table is my dad would say something, then my mom would say something, then Cabot, Kelly, Corey, and then they changed the subject. And I always had a terrible time getting into the conversation, but in 4-H, I could get up in front of a club once a month and give a 5 or 10-minute speech without interruption, and well, really haven't stopped since. Then I went to school at Mankato State, became a college dropout. I left college after my junior year when that little manufacturing company came up for sale in my hometown. And the reason the business was for sale is because the gentleman that had started the company in 1972 had already suffered a massive heart attack by 1983. So it looked like something I should get involved with. It was a stressful business. The presentation I deliver the most often is called STP, Stress, Time, and Procrastination Management. Coincidentally, the presentation I deliver second most often is handling difficult people, dealing with people you can't stand. So I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but things turned out just fine. The business did grow to 3 companies in 3 states. Left those companies back in 1989 to do this, to provide speeches, seminars, and workshops. All the years we were growing those companies, we'd run to Mankato or Sioux Falls or Spencer, Iowa, anywhere Career Track, Dale Carnegie, or Skill Path were offering seminars. And we always found that we could go there for a few hours and learn some information we could apply for a few years. And that's the type of information I want to share with you today. Information that will work if we put it to work. Information, frankly, that's backed up from here to next week with research you can trust. The information I'm going to share with you this morning, it's not something that came to me in a dream in the middle of the night. I just want to forewarn you, I'm going to make a lot of suggestions. I'm not necessarily going to give you advice. You have a 38-page handout that supports what I'm going to be talking about this morning. 3 pages are promotion, about half the pages are homework. So there's really about 15 pages that we're going to focus deeply on as we go through the content. But we're going to spend about 90 minutes together. Can you imagine that? This morning, my oldest brother, who's a police officer, called me and said, hey, you want to meet me for coffee? And I said, no, I have a presentation this morning. And he said, how long is that going to last? I said, about 90 minutes. And his response was, who can listen to you for 90 minutes? I'm going to guess over the last 30 years, he has said that, I don't know, 700 or 800 times, but he still thinks it's pretty funny. He gives me great material for my handling difficult people presentation, that's for sure. But I think the time will go by quickly. So let's take a look at a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be sharing with you. And as we go through this information, you can jot down notes or keep that handout close in hand, and you'll be able to go ahead. Well, what happened to my, here we go. Come on, where are you? There we are. Oh, it should be a big blue sky or water. I'm never quite sure if that's sky or water, but it is very soothing. And so when it comes to conflict resolution, we need to talk about the potentially constructive nature of conflict. Sometimes we think of conflict of people yelling and screaming and cussing and swearing and wrestling on the floor, but I find that conflict sometimes is simply a misunderstanding. Sometimes it's miscommunication. Sometimes people are distracted and they think faster than they can talk, and they'll say something that just doesn't come out quite right. And I think, you know, with the pandemic, when people have been under so much stress and so much concern, that it seems like people have grown a little bit thinner skin. So what we want to do is make sure we're a person that responds rather than reacts, that feels cool, calm, and collected in those conflict situations, and really use it as an opportunity to learn, not to necessarily be frustrated. And if I don't understand your point of view, I should be, you know, intrigued by that. I should be curious about that and want to learn more about your perspective. So that's kind of the approach that we're going to take. So when it comes to this issue of the potentially constructive nature of conflict, conflicts make us more aware of problems in our relationship that need to be resolved. We can't read each other's minds, and I don't think we'd even want to. I think that'd be kind of strange, kind of creepy. Conflicts also encourage change, because somebody's dissatisfied. Things aren't going the way we planned, or something's not working out the way we hoped. Conflicts increases motivation. It's that fight or flight response that you probably talked about and discussed in your stress management workshop earlier. And when it comes to motivation, because of the adrenaline, because of the blood sugars, because of that fight or flight response, we kind of get it off our chest in a way. We have the energy and the enthusiasm to share our thoughts and our feelings. Conflicts are always interesting because we can't believe people think like that. I mean, people have a different perspective. I have a great little book over here on the shelves that's called Everyone's Normal Till You Get to Know Them. On the surface level, we all seem to get along pretty well, but we dig a little bit deeper into beliefs, attitudes, and values, and there's some surprises that we find in how people think and how they feel. Usually better decisions are generally made when there are some disagreements. We talk about the pros, the cons, any hesitations, any reservations, any concerns, and often we'll come up with a better decision if we've had some lively discussion. Conflicts also reduce the day-to-day irritations of working with each other. It's kind of like a pressure release valve on a water heater. Had it up to here, you let off the pressure. Might have to apologize for your language and your manner, but the catharsis to get it off your chest always feels pretty good. Conflicts help us understand what we are like as a person, what we really care about, what's really important to us. Conflicts can be fun. It can be fun if we, don't take it personally. I always like to approach conflict as a consultant, as an outside consultant. I love being a consultant. I walk into organizations and I say, what you're doing there, I've seen people do it differently. You might want to consider that. Well, what you're doing, I used to do that, but if I did it like this, that would save me about 5 minutes an hour. That's a couple hours a week. Might want to consider that. What you're doing over there, stop that. And then I leave. So I care, but not that much. So sometimes if we see ourselves almost as an outsider, as an outside consultant, what you're observing, the situation, these circumstances, what would you suggest? And so you ask questions, make suggestions, fail, ask questions, make suggestions, fail. In a funny sort of way, become a good failer. Might not be the idea, not failure, but failure. It might not be the idea we need right now, but it might be exactly the idea we need a week from now or a month from now. So we want to make sure that we get those ideas out in the open. If I share with you what I really think and feel, and you share with me what you really think and feel, we almost create a third reservoir of knowledge that never existed before that we can draw from. Conflicts can deepen a relationship. If you've had a conflict with someone and you're at an estate sale or an auction and there's 100 people there you don't know, and then you recognize someone that you've had a conflict with in the past, you can feel the depth of that relationship. There's a connection there. And conflicts can lead to growth and development as an individual and in our relationships. And that's what we're going to focus on for the next 80 minutes or so. So the key is to see conflict as creative cooperation. We create new alternatives, something that wasn't there before. Conversations of problem solving with the spirit of an adventure, the spirit of discovery, and the spirit of creativity. It means the whole is greater than the parts. So it's kind of abundance mentality rather than, the scarcity mentality. We can always come up with more ideas and be more creative in how we get those resources. So you're simply opening your mind in a way and heart and expressions to new possibilities, new alternatives, and new options. You begin with the belief that parties involved will gain more insight and that kind of certain amount of excitement of that mutual learning. And that insight will create a momentum toward more and more insights and learning and growth, and that's how it seems to support it going forward. So we want to create a supportive communication environment. Now, I'd imagine your weather's been somewhat similar to here in Minnesota, where it's been kind of warm and warm and sunny. Well, you probably have some relationships that are warm and sunny. Well, every once in a while, in the winter, it's kind of cold and gloomy. Well, you might have some relationships that are cold and gloomy. The good news is this: when you come to work, you can set the thermostat to warm and comfortable. So people will be supported in sharing their ideas and their thoughts to create that supportive communication environment, just like the weather. So we'll really listen to each other's ideas, and we can do some brainstorming. We don't evaluate. We subordinate that to the spirit of creativity and imagining what could be, and a lot of that intellectual sharing and networking. So the more authentic we can become, the more open, the more honest, the more genuine in our expression, particularly regarding personal experiences, that we've had in previous jobs or other departments or with other employees or whatever it might be, and even our self-doubts, that vulnerability. The more people can relate to you, and your expression, and the safer it makes them feel to express themselves. So that expression, in turn, kind of feeds back on others' spirit and genuine creative empathy, genuine care and concern. And it produces new insights and learning and a sense of excitement and adventure that keeps the process going in a positive direction. So the essence of positive conflict resolution is to really value differences, to respect them, to build on strengths that we all possess, and to compensate for any weaknesses that we have, and to be vulnerable enough to share that. So our attitude can be this: if a person of your intelligence and competence and commitment disagrees with me, then there must be something to your disagreement that I don't understand. And I need to understand it. You have a perspective and a frame of reference that I really need to look at. So the key is to value the mental, the emotional, and the psychological differences between people. Now, the person who is truly effective has the humility and the reverence to recognize his own perceptual limitations and to appreciate the rich resources available through the interaction with the hearts and minds of other human beings. When I give presentations on emotional intelligence, we talk about self-awareness. What do I know about my strengths and my weaknesses and vulnerabilities and self-regulation? How do I communicate those in a way that enhances my brand and creates that trust in the relationship? So that person that values differences, because of those differences, add to the knowledge and understanding and the reality for everyone at the table. So when we become aware of the differences in our perceptions, we can say this, or at least internally, we can remind ourselves, good, you see it differently. Help me see what you see. And we want to make sure we have a broad understanding of the situation. So when we involve people in the problem and immerse them in it, and they soak it in and feel it is their problem too to solve, they tend to become more of an important part of the solution and more engaged and more supportive. As a result, new goals, shared goals are created, and the whole enterprise moves upward, often in ways that we could not have anticipated, could never have dreamed of. So the more genuine the involvement, the more sincere and sustained the participation in analyzing and solving problems. And I'm going to give you all sorts of techniques to do that, to extend the conversations, the greater the release of everyone's creativity and the commitment to help create, the solution. So it builds on the teamwork, the team building, and the development of unity and creativity with other human beings. And it's important because we know this. I have a little book over here called Understanding Human Communication, and there's research by Dr. Ronald Adler that claims this: people who lack strong relationships have 2 to 3 times the risk of early death, regardless of whether they smoke, drink alcohol, or exercise regularly. Now, please don't misinterpret that statistic. That doesn't mean you can lay on the sofa, drinking booze, smoking cigarettes, eating junk food, live a long, happy life as long as you get along with your coworkers. That'll help, but it's not going to solve all of the issues. And when it comes to conflict resolution, it is what you say and how you say it. And it's little bitty things like this. Saying to someone, have a nice day, sounds friendly, but saying enjoy the next 24 hours, well, that sounds kind of threatening. So we want to make sure that we keep in mind that it's not just what we say and how we say it, but it's also it's the content and the context, the situation, that communication episode we find ourselves in. And we want to be clear and concise. We don't want to leave it to chance. Well, here's an example. I was trying to buy some organic fruit and at the grocery store, and I was asking the guy in the produce department if their apples had been sprayed with any poisonous chemicals because they were for my wife. Well, I should be done with the police interview soon. I should have been much more clear and concise. So we have this thing on the next page of your handout. It kind of looks like a giant fly's head. It's called the communication model. And you see yourself in the left eyeball. You see the other party in the right eyeball. And the reason I say other party is because I think working together should be fun. I'm the only person that thinks that's funny, but I keep saying it because I think it's going to catch on. Anyhow, we have all of this information, rules, regulations, policies, procedures. We pack all those ideas into words, and we send a message by arrow over to the other party. It could be another department. It can be a citizen. It can be a coworker. It can be a friend, a family member. It's anybody and everybody that has an impact on how well your day goes. And then they provide us feedback by arrow. Now, we have 2 types of arrows: Cupid's arrows that attract people to us and our ideas, enemy arrows that drive people away. And we'll be able to tell because people provide us that feedback by arrow. Direct feedback, what they say to us face-to-face, toe-to-toe, over the phone, or what they commit to writing. Indirect feedback, facial expressions, body posture, hand gestures, how they storm out of a room. And then, of course, delayed feedback, what happens over time. So with the principles and the strategies I'm going to share with you, we want to become very comfortable with sending messages. And if there's any misunderstandings, of course, we'll paraphrase, restate that message to make sure they apply the appropriate meaning. So we want to have kind of a command of the communication model so we feel confident and we're competent in our interactions. So there's 5 laws of communication I want to share with you that really support that communication model. Law number 1, it's a process. We send messages, we get feedback, we might have to paraphrase, restate the message to make sure there's a proper interpretation. But before we start shooting those arrows around, I'd like you to put these 6 criteria of personal credibility in place. It comes out of a great little book over here called Reaching Out: Interpersonal Effectiveness and Self-Actualization. According to Dr. David W. Johnson, all 6 of these need to be present. Otherwise, you're lacking credibility. 5 out of 6 really doesn't cut it. 4 out of 6, that's even worse. So let's take a look at this list. Number 1, consistently appear warm and friendly. It's not that you're high-fiving and backslapping, saying how great it is to work together every day, but nobody worries who showed up today, the happy person or the unhappy person. You're even-keeled, pleasant to be around. Then you express your intentions and motives. I'll call you at 10 o'clock. I'll stop by at 3 o'clock. And long-term goals too. So there's no suspicion of what you're up to. So you express your intentions and motives. Then you demonstrate trustworthiness. You follow through with what you said you're going to do. And you're an information source. You know knowable information, what's pinned, pasted, posted on the walls, the guidebooks, handbooks, on the website, the meetings you attend. And then in certain areas of your career, you develop relevant expertise. That you know more about that than anybody else. And when people have a question about that, they seek you out for the answers rather than wasting their time talking to anyone else. And then you project dynamism, which is natural enthusiasm. Dynamism isn't that you're doing calisthenics and jumping jacks in between phone calls and meetings, but dynamism is when you walk in a room, the lights get a little bit brighter rather than a little bit dimmer. When you come to work, people are happy to see you rather than resenting the fact you showed up again today. and, and they're all free and they all need to be present. But it's how people perceive us. And perception is powerful. And actually, there's 6 perceptions that go on between each of us. So communication is complex because of perception. Who I think I am, who I believe you think I am, then really who you think I am. And then from your side of the relationship, who you think you are, who you believe I think you are, and really who I think you are. So there's 6 perceptions going on between each and every one of us. There's 150 people on this Zoom meeting. That's 600 perceptions, no, 900 perceptions going on all at the same time, trying to figure out you buying into this, going to make that adjustment. A lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to perception. But that's what gives us a chance to create a culture climate where we work, recreate it just in how we interact with each other. And it's fast. Look how fast it is. It may take as little as 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second, to form an impression of another person, to decide whether or not he or she is attractive, trustworthy, competent, and likable. A tenth of a second. It takes 2/10 of a second time to change a facial expression. We're late. According to Princeton University, that's less time than it takes to form a rational thought. I always tell my good friends in city and county government, they're held to an unfair standard. Their neighbors watch them leave their house. They take a look at their watch. They can't be downtown in 8 minutes because we're paying their salaries. I work with county highway departments. They see a car coming. They just grab a shovel and start moving some gravel around because everybody has a smartphone to take a picture of them leaning on a shovel because we've never leaned on a shovel. I mean, it's really something how when you work for government, how you're on stage and whoever is in front of the customer, whoever's in front of the citizens representing everybody in your government. So you want to make sure that you are up to the challenge. In a funny sort of way, it's opening night in every one of your relationships, a tenth of a second at a time. Now, law number 3 on the next page of your handout is that messages, not meanings, are communicated. And this is critical in conflict situations. Messages are in words, but meanings are in people and how they interpret those words. So we want to make sure we have accuracy in the words we choose to use. And accuracy is the precise shade of meaning. Are you happy? Are you thrilled? Are you worried? Are you concerned? What are you? There's over 3,400 words in the English language for feelings and emotions, 3,400 words. Dr. Robin Lakoff asked men and women how many feelings and emotions they have. Men listed an average of 8. 8 out of 3,400. Women listed an average of 14, which is nearly twice as many, but that's 11 words on the average we use to describe a possible 3,400 different feelings and emotions. I think we could be a little bit more accurate. But you also want to use simple words everyone feels comfortable with and can understand. If a longer, less familiar word can be substituted with a shorter, more familiar word, please do that. I think people rather feel informed rather than ignorant. I grew up ignorant, doesn't bother me. People use a great big word. I say, is that one word or two? How do you spell that? But most people aren't that confident or as confident as I am with my ignorance, and they have a little bit of a thin skin. So we want to make sure we use simple words people feel comfortable with, can understand. And sometimes, we call that, and then go with the more technical jargon. And we get so tired of saying those great big words. We just use this acronym or acrostic. So you provide guidance without pointing it out. But even if we have accuracy in the words we choose to use and we use simple words, even in our closest relationships, there can be misunderstandings that can lead to conflict. And it could be just simply misunderstanding. Take a look at this little story. While attending a marriage seminar on communication, Keith and his wife, Carolyn, listened to the instructor declare it's essential that husbands and wives know things that are important to each other. He addressed the men. Can you describe your wife's favorite flower? Keith leaned over, touched Carolyn's arm gently and whispered, Pillsbury all-purpose, isn't it, honey? I don't think that's going to get, but you know what? No, that was accurate. It was simple, just a misunderstanding. When it comes to contrasting perceptions, and you'll have this later on in your handout, I've been a landlord since 1987. Now, tenants' perception, this comes out of a great little book called Getting to Yes, written by Fisher and Ury. This is contrasting perceptions between a tenant and a landlady considering renewing a lease. So they have a history of together. Tenant's perception, I always pay rent when she asks for it. Landlady's perception, he never pays rent until I ask for it. Now, from his side of the relationship, sounds pretty positive. I always pay rent when she asks for it. From her side of the relationship, you can almost taste the resent. He never pays rent until I ask for it. Now, when is rent due? Usually the first of the month. You might have a 5-day grace period. But when did we decide that? When we signed the lease. I mean, this certainly. So we have an opportunity for great first impressions, but never forget this. We have just as many opportunity for lasting positive impression. So we have to think about in communication and conflict, how it gets started and also how we want that person to feel or think at the end. So we have just as many opportunities for good first impressions as last impressions. Okay, law number 3, let's get back to this. You want to provide coherence. There's 3 things we need to discuss and then discuss them in that order. Just the more organized the conversation, the more credibility you have. And then language intensity. Almost anything we talk about, you can use highly negative language intensity, highly positive language intensity, or neutral language intensity. As professionals, we need to neutralize the language so people feel comfortable, because the language, of course, the words we choose are appropriate to the relationship and the situation. Now, if we're explaining something to somebody for the very first time, so people say, so tell me what you're thinking, then we practice this SEER method. You make a statement, you explain it, you give some examples, and then you restate it. Follows our natural train of thought. So let's back up the truck here. About 5 minutes ago, when I got to this slide and we get to this accuracy, and I said, the words we choose to use need to be accurate. That was my statement. Then my explanation was accuracy was the precise shade of meaning. Then the examples I gave were, are you happy? Are you thrilled? Are you worried? Or are you concerned? Then I provided another example from the research by Dr. Robin Lakoff, asking men and women how many feelings and emotions they have. Men listed 8, women listed 14, 11 words on the average. My restatement was, I think we could be a little bit more accurate. The key is to make sure you don't say to someone, I know this is very complicated. Let me simplify it for you. I'd stab you in the thigh if you did that to me. Just simplify it for people. So you make a statement, explain it, give an example, and restate it. Because if you tell me something I haven't heard before, I'm thinking, what is that? Then you start explaining it to me, and I'm thinking, well, I wonder how that works. Then you provide me some examples and a description of that idea in action. And then I'm thinking, oh, okay, what did you call that again? And then you provide the restate. It's magic. You can use it presenting your ideas, or you can use it asking questions about the ideas of others. I just love that little model. Now, if you're asking people to change, you need to communicate these 4 Ps: the purpose, the good reason why, the picture, what will this look like in the future, so I can imagine it, picture it, to believe it. And then the plan, this will take a week, this will take a month, this will take a year, seems pretty well thought out. And then the part they play and how vital and important and integrated that is in the success of the idea. You sell those 4 Ps, people will follow you through fire, or at least shallow water. And that might be all you need that day. Law number 4, one cannot not communicate, which simply means no matter what you say or don't say, people apply meaning to it. And of course, it's also what you say and how you say it. Take a look at this little story. A man and woman who've never met before find themselves assigned to the same sleeping room on a transcontinental train. Well, that's kind of mysterious. Though initially embarrassed and uneasy sharing a room, the 2 are tired and fall asleep quickly, he in the upper bunk and she in the lower bunk. At about 1 a.m., the man leans over and gently wakes the woman, saying, ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but would you be willing to reach into the closet to get me a second blanket? I'm awfully cold. I have a better idea, she replies, just for tonight. Let's pretend we're married. Wow, that's a great idea, he explains. Good, she replies, get your own blanket. Wow. So how we say it's pretty powerful. Now, you know this in that old UCLA study, if you're face-to-face in a conversation, about 7% of the emotional impact is in the words we choose to use, and 38% is in how we say it, 55% what you look like when you say it. But you know, when we're on the telephone, about 20% is in the emotional impact is in the words we choose to use. On the telephone, about 80% of the impact is how we say it. So you got to warm up the pipe so you have that warm and cooperative tone of voice. And when we commit things to writing, it's 100%, because that's why people read between the lines trying to figure out what we meant by what we wrote. So we want to make sure that we really balance that, effective word choice, but also the nonverbal communication. Now you'll see going down your handout when you open that up or print that out, STADLE. The number 1 most admired quality of a coworker is their listening skills. It comes out of a great little book over here called The Business of Communicating. But you got to look like you're listening. So stable nonverbal communication is the acrostic. So what posture we can be in to demonstrate we're an active listener. So the S stands for squarely face the other person. What does that tell people when you squarely face them? Well, you're giving them your undivided attention. You used to claim you could always trust a square shooter, so it implies trustworthiness. Tip your head when you're following along. Nod your head only when you do agree. So clean up those head movements so there's no misunderstandings. Now I could have put on there, nod your head when you agree, tip your head when you're following along, but then that would spell snable. And well, that's hard to remember because that's not a word. A stands for attentive facial expressions. People say things we agree with. We can smile. People say things we don't understand. We can look confused. They say something we disagree with. We might want to squint. It provides inclusion, affection, and control. A barrier-free environment. Remove the barriers between you and the other person. Maybe this is something we should talk about over lunch. Maybe this is something we should never talk about over lunch. Maybe this is something we should talk about in a conference room, but think of the barriers and remove them. Lean forward slightly, show your enthusiasm as a listener, and then of course, eye contact. But you see behind the words eye contact, the word normal is not a staring contest. You can blink, only extraterrestrials don't blink. Normal eye contact in North America, according to Dr. Joseph DeVito, is 1.8 to 2.6 seconds. Then somebody needs to blink. It's about the length of one sentence in conversation. And the person that's speaking often will blink in between sentences to collect their thoughts for the next sentence. But as a listener, you want to make sure you also blink. It's not a staring contest. Law number 5, there's always 2 elements to communication, the content and the relationship. Content is the issue, the relationship is the individual. Content is the problem, the relationship is the person. Our job is to really understand both so you can tailor the content to fit the relationship, help people make a good decision, feel good about the decision we ask them to make. Now, people give us all sorts of clues and cues about what's important to them, whether it's achievement on display, acquisition and saving, adventure and change, companionship and affiliation, sympathy and generosity. But when it comes to the workplace, the next page of your handout, you'll find it usually boils down to 4 things. We got to get something done. And if we're going to do it, we want to do it well. It'd be nice if we could get along because we spend so much time together. And it sure is nice to get appreciation when we do good work. I'm sure your folks that work in the Department of Health, my goodness, it's been pretty busy for the last 16 months and working hard, morning, day and night, worry and concern. And then, sometimes you might have some, goofy governor just across the state lines that criticizes. Yeah, my goodness, but you should be that tireless, hard work, tirelessly working. Thank you for doing that. So when it comes to appreciation, when people do a good job, we want to make sure we recognize that. So let's take a look at these intentions. When people want to get something done, maybe a project, and you like that person, of course, you'd focus on the task, getting it done. Your communication would be brief and to the point. However, we may not like everybody we work with. So that could be an issue. And then when somebody wants to get it right, whatever it is, if you like that person, of course, you'd focus on the details, all your reports well documented, every I dotted, every T crossed. Problem is, we don't necessarily like everyone we work with. So it's not that we're going to do, poor work, but I kind of have a sense we might not do our best work for them. And then when somebody wants to get along with you and you like that person, of course, you'd engage in friendly chit chat and considerate communications. Problem is, we may not like everybody we work with, so we may not engage in conversation with them. And then when people want to get appreciation and we like that person, of course, we'd recognize their contributions with words of gratitude and do it enthusiastically. Problem is, we may not like everybody we work with, so sometimes we bite our tongue. So what happens when those intentions aren't fulfilled? Well, when people want to get it done and they fear it's not going to get done, they become more controlling, more demanding, more forceful. And when people want to get it right and they fear it's going to be done wrong, they become more perfectionistic, pointing out potential flaws, potential errors. Are you sure you filled that out correctly? I filled this form out 1,000 times. Yeah, I think so. And then when people want to get along with you, but they feel left out, then they exaggerate their behavior and they engage in all sorts of relational maintenance behaviors and trying to win your approval, hanging around, picking up a cup of coffee, bringing in donuts for you, just trying to win the relationship. And then when people want to get appreciation and they're not getting any, well, they become more attention getting, throw an adult temper tantrum, or they'll go silent for a few days. And you say, are you okay? You haven't said anything for a few days. At least they're going to get some attention because they didn't get appreciation. And they kind of go into this metamorphosis and turn into people we can't stand. So what I would like you to do, and this is kind of the homework part again now, is I'd like you to come up with 5 different ways you can tell someone in a conflict situation that things are going to get done. Things are going to get done correctly, get done right, that you get along with them and you appreciate them. Now, this could be a coworker, it could be a citizen, a customer, it could be another department. I always say practice at home and then bring it to work. So you're going to get it done. You would say something like, consider it done. That'll be my number 1 priority. I'll put that at the top of my list. Sometimes you can combine getting it done with getting it done right by saying, I will take care of it myself, because now your reputation is on the line. Now, getting it done right, you would say things, let's review the form to make sure we haven't missed anything. Let's go through my notes one more time to make sure we haven't missed any of the details. We have an expert on staff that handles that sort of thing. Let's have them take a look at it. But anything that you can say that would support it's going to be done correctly, accurately, that it's valid, it's proper. It follows a rule, regulation, statute. Anything you can do to verify it's done right always bolsters, and it's not only going to get done, it's going to get done well. You're getting along. You might say, it sure was nice talking with you. Call me anytime. I look forward to working with you next week. Have a nice day. Have a great weekend. Any of those sort of relational statements. I'm not hard. And then you appreciate them. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I really appreciate your interest. I really appreciate your hard work. Thank you for taking care of this so promptly. So I call this the magic pixie dust. And what I would like you to think about when people are frustrated or seem to be feeling a lot of tension in the issue that you're discussing, listen to what they're saying. Is it that they feel the pressure of time, that it's not going to get done in time? Or is it that they feel like it hasn't been well thought out, it's not going to be done properly or right? Or is it that they feel like no one, really likes them and they're just trying to, exaggerate their behavior, or maybe, to get some attention because they didn't feel appreciated? But what I'd like you to do, though, is in like summary statements, or when you're providing an orientation to the discussion, say, this is the timeline that we're going to work with and finish. So I know it's going to get done. And I think if we continue to discuss this and talk about our, the hesitations, concerns, and reservations, it's going to be done correctly. And I really do, appreciate how you're sharing your thoughts and feelings. And I think, this is really going to build trust in our relationship. I mean, if you sprinkle the magic pixie dust and it's going to get done, it's going to get done right. We get along and I appreciate you. You won't have to deal with people that becoming controlling, perfectionistic, approval seeking, or attention getting. That's exhausting. This is kind of fun. That's a long day. Day flies by. I mean, how long does it take to say this? I would say to Natasha and Jessica, we started on time, we ended on time, got it done. I think it went pretty well, so we got it done right. I sure enjoyed working with you, and I really appreciate the business. Now, how long does it take to say those 4 things? Well, I've timed it. It only takes 6 seconds. To sprinkle the magic pixie dust. It's going to get done right. We got along and I appreciate you. So if I had 50 phone calls in a day, 6 seconds, that's 5 minutes of my day that I could make sure that people heard it was going to get done right. We got along and I appreciate them. Otherwise, I'll spend the other 9 hours and 55 minutes dealing with, people becoming controlling, perfectionistic, approval seeking, and attention getting. Just a suggestion, but that's how I'd like to spend my day. And it really does make conflict resolution more positive. So let's take a look at other things that can create conflict. Now, you have a long list on the next page based upon what I call dialectical tensions. And it's come from a dialectical model that people in virtually all interpersonal relationships, whether they're professional or personal, must deal with equally important or simultaneous opposing forces. These are called dialectical tensions. And people must continually negotiate to satisfy opposing and kind of incompatible forces, both within themselves, internal struggles, and with one another. So I provided you a long list of these. So as you're listening to the conversations and you're not really hearing the get it done, get it right, get along, get appreciation, it might be one of these. It might be, something to deal with, impartiality versus favoritism, or it might be something to deal with openness or closedness. It might be something that deals with maybe my timeline versus someone else's timeline, or short-term goals versus long-term goals. So sometimes we just have to see it on paper and say, what I think we're struggling with and why we're not, really, is the stability versus change. We have a system that has worked well for years, and now we're trying something new. And I think there's, that's the dialectical tension, the stability of knowing what we get with the old process, with the uncertainty of what we're going to get when we change to the new one. And just getting it out in the open like that. I love this list. It really helps people to see past themselves and to really see what those dialectical tensions are. So keep that as a ready reference. Print out that handout and wear it out. I'll send you another one. Okay, but the key to conflict resolution is to be a good listener. So I'm going to share with you the 14 characteristics of effective listener. And, probably 12 out of the 14 you do really well. There might be 2 or 3, though, that we could maybe do a little bit more of. Like, it'd be motivated. Now, what's a motivated listener look like? Well, stable nonverbal communication, squarely face the other person, tips their head occasionally, attentive facial expressions, removes barriers, leans forward slightly, and of course, number 2, makes eye contact. People know you hear with your ears. They judge whether or not you're listening with your eyes. Are you making eye contact or not? And show interest, even if it's not interesting. Keep this in mind. This person has decided to talk with you rather than do anything else in their life that's interesting to them. So we need to show interest. Avoid distracting actions. Some people click their pen. Some people run their fingers through their hair. I used to run my thumbnail under my other hand's fingernails. I don't know why, but we all have this fidgeting response. And what we're trying to do is non-verbally anchor our response for when we get a chance to get back into the conversation. So find out what your distracting action is, because most of us have one. Ask the people you live with, they'll tell you, and then manage it, cut it in half, but you want to avoid those distracting actions. Demonstrate empathy, try to put yourself in their situation. What would be the feeling or emotion? I can understand how frustrating that, disappointing that would be. I can understand how excited you are about the promotion, but really try to put yourself in their shoes and try to identify those thoughts and feelings and see if you can match that up. Take in the whole picture, the person and the problem, the history. How did we get to this point? Future expectations, where are we headed? And then ask questions. I find the best questions to ask in conflict resolution situations are what questions and how questions, because there are no wrong answers to what or how questions. And if you ask what or how questions, you listen first, and you have more credibility when you respond because people believe you're taking their perspective in mind, even if you're not. Now, with what questions, you'll get explanations and definitions. With how questions, you'll get examples and descriptions. Now, when I walk into a conflict situation that I wasn't part of, but I'm going to be now, whether I'm going to be a referee or some sort of harmonizer, I consciously think about going 3 rounds by asking a what question, then a how question, a what question and a how question, a what question and a how question. And sometimes the last 2 or 3 questions don't even make sense. And then people kind of stop and say, I must not be explaining this very well. And then their whole focus shifts to helping me understand rather than them being right. And so I always like to go 3 rounds. What, how, what, how, what, how. Then I have a pretty good understanding of, the whole picture, what's going on. Paraphrase, even if you think you really do understand, listening interpretation is only 25% accurate. Now, this is kind of frightening to me as a communication expert. Listening and retention is about 25%. And according to the research by Dr. Ronald Adler, listening interpretation is also about 25%. So as human beings, we retain about 25% of what we hear, but only 25% of that is accurately interpreted. So if my math is correct, when we shut this thing down at 11:30, you'll have 6.25% of what I meant. I can't tell you how many times I've been quoted for things I haven't even thought, let alone said. So we always want to paraphrase just in case there's a misunderstanding. We paraphrase because we do understand. We paraphrase because we're trying to understand, or we paraphrase because they need to hear what they've just said. People think at 800 to 1200 words per minute, they only speak at about 150 to 200 words per minute. So they're thinking faster than they can talk. And sometimes they put the emphasis on the wrong syllable and it kind of changes the entire meaning of the sentence. And you say, what I heard you say was blah, 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 blah. And they go, oh, I meant blah, 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 blah. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So sometimes we need to paraphrase just so they can hear what they've said. Don't interrupt. Let them finish their own sentences. Sometimes people go up one side of the fence and they climb up the other side of the fence and sit in the middle of the issue. So just let them talk. The more they talk, the better they feel. Talking soothes the emotion. Not talking stirs trouble. So let them talk. Interpret and integrate what's being said. Don't overreact. Don't overtalk. Don't take it personally. You don't get paid to take it personally. We'll talk about understanding our emotions and responding appropriately in just a minute. Confront your biases. What are you holding against that person? Often I find that we've had a conflict with this person in the past. They won, we lost. We just haven't gotten over it. But if you were to put together a list of 100 things, there's probably 95 out of 100 you would agree with this person. And when we work together, so closely, sometimes you just have to set aside those things that we disagree. It's kind of like family, if you want them to show up and watch each other eat at the holidays, sometimes you have to agree to disagree on certain things and then focus on the more positive topics that you can interact. But probably 95 out of 100 things you would agree with this person about. So bet with the house, go with that. Make smooth transition because listening is great conversation, and then be natural. Because if you do the first 13, that's supernatural listening. No one's that excited other than a collie puppy to listen to you. So you want to pick out 2 or 3 of those, you could be a little bit better at, but a minor adjustment in listening, major impact in our relationships. So understanding our emotions so we can respond appropriately. Now go to that page there. It has that little Ant-Man there in the top left corner, understanding your emotions, responding appropriately. And you'll see this kind of looks like a funnel. All information simply comes through our senses. It's raw data. No meaning's been applied to it. It's what people say, it's what people do. Now, the second step is the interpretation, which is the intellectual question. Why? Why did a person do that? Why did a person say that? Now, based upon that interpretation, which is intellectual, what immediately follows is a feeling. And once we're trapped in that emotional state, it limits our options and what we would say or what we would do when we feel like that. But as professionals, we need to express, and hopefully it's our best option. I always say, practice at home, bring it to work. Take a look at this story. A couple drove down a country road for several miles, not saying a word. An earlier discussion had led to an argument, and neither of them wanted to concede their position. I've been in that car before. Now, they did not attend this session on conflict resolution, and unfortunately didn't understand their emotions to respond appropriately. So he started the conversation by doing this. As they passed a barnyard of mules, goats, and pigs, the husband asked sarcastically, relatives of yours? Not a good start. Or finish, yep, the wife replied, in-laws. So I think if they both would understand their emotions and respond appropriately, that they love and care about each other and they don't want to hurt each other's feelings, wouldn't that be a great start? Instead of getting carried away that way. So you need to understand your emotions so we can respond appropriately. And the way I'd like you to think about this, it's kind of like going to a buffet or a smorgasbord. I could have the beef, I could have the chicken, I could have the pork, I could have that fish, or I could have salad, but I have a choice. And that's what the next page is all about. We always have a choice in how we respond. So we have 5 different reasons why we listen, 5 different ways we can respond to the same conversation. So we can advise and evaluate. Usually the first thing out of our mouth is, you should. If I were you, this is what I would do. We can analyze and interpret, where we say, you know what's going on here, you know what your problem is. We can reassure and support. I believe, give them credit for a job-related skill or personal trait. We can question and probe by asking what or how questions. Or we can paraphrase and understand by saying, if I understand you correctly, you're thinking or feeling. If it's more of a intellectual conversation or more of an emotional conversation, you'd make that adjustment. So if we were working together face-to-face in a seminar, I'd have you script these, but I'll go through these with you. Let's say I catch you in the hallway and I say this to you. I keep getting the idea my boss is angry at me. It seems as if lately she hasn't been joking around very much, and she hasn't said anything at all about my work for about 3 weeks now. I wonder what I should do. Now, if you're advising and evaluating, you might say you should schedule a meeting with her. You should be happy you have a job. You should be happy she's not talking to you. If I were you, this is what I would do. Okay. Analyzing and interpreting smart. You know what your problem is? You think you have to be buddies with your boss. You know what's going on here? You think you have to be friends with everybody that's a supervisor or manager around here. Now, advising and evaluating and analyzing and interpreting, can create a defensive communication climate, because sometimes when I come up and talk to you, I may not want to be told what my problem is or what I should do. But the reason they're listed in this order, this is the order in which we respond most often in the workplace. Nearly 40% of our responses are advising and evaluating. You should, or you ought to. If I were you, this is what I would do. About 30% of our responses are analyzing and interpreting. You know what's going on here. You know what your problem is. Then it goes 12, 10, and 8. 12% are reassuring and supportive. I believe you have good communication skills and we'll be able to work this out. I believe you do good work. I'm always satisfied with what you turn in. Questioning and probing. What else is going on in their job? Or how long have you felt this way? Any of those open-ended questions. And then paraphrasing and understanding response. If I understand you correctly, you're worried about your job performance or how your boss feels about your job performance. If I understand you correctly, you're concerned that you may be losing your job. But this is what I would like you to do with that page. I'd like you to, in your mind, turn this upside down. Spend more time paraphrasing and understanding people, then asking what or how questions to lead them to their own conclusions, then be reassuring and supportive and say, go get them, Tiger, you'll be all right. And you know what you might not have to do that day is tell them what their problem is or what they should do. Wouldn't that be nice? Or you could put them in a hat, pull them out randomly. 3 out of 5 times we'd say something positive. So I want you to think about, you always have an option as a listener. So, you might want to do that in your department, or you might want to fill that out just to expand your options and how you could respond to the same conversation. Now, here's another technique. I'd like you to always think about how to be the best listener in the communication relationship or that conflict situation. So one of these is to get, prepared physically and psychologically, knowing you're going to have this morning an hour-and-a-half presentation on conflict resolution. You might get prepared by drinking something that has some caffeine in it. You might have had a good breakfast, good night's rest. Psychologically, you might have written down some questions or concerns that you're having in a relationship. So if I don't cover that, you might ask that in the chat or the question and answer. So you want to get prepared physically and psychologically. Then you want to stay involved, jot down notes, keep turning the pages or keep moving through your PDF if you're working on the handout that way. And then keep an open mind. I might have said something that made you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, you should probably figure out why that made you feel uncomfortable, because it didn't bother me at all. And then review and evaluate the content of the presentation today, but also your performance as a listener. When did you drift off? When did you think about what errands you needed to run after work today? So I'd like you to review and evaluate your own performance. Those are the keys to active listening. So it really does enhance what's on the next page of your handout, which is called perception checking. I love perception checking in conflict situations because I'm always amazed how many times I misinterpreted what they meant by what they said. So what perception checking is you describe the behavior or repeat the comment that they've made. And then you provide two possible interpretations of what they meant by that. One that you think is pretty close, one that you're not quite sure if that's even close at all. And that gives them some wiggle room to be able to, come up with an answer without much pressure. And then you request clarification. Is that what you're saying or what? So I have 3 examples at the bottom of this page. The first one is really close to home. We always had a rule in our house. If the kids ever slammed their bedroom door, pins came out, door came off the hinges, I hauled it to the other end of the house. The first 2 kids caught on to that quickly. They wanted to keep their bedroom door on the hinges, so they quit slamming their doors. That youngest daughter, though, oh, she was a pill. And she would, be slamming doors, and I'd have to carry those heavy wood doors, solid wood doors, down to the other end of the house. And one day her mother and I were having a conversation with her, and she was not very happy about the content of that. She got up, stormed down the hallway, slammed her bedroom door, and my wife says, "Get the hammer and the screwdriver. Let's go pop the pins." I said, "Can I try something else?" She goes, "What?" I said, "Give me a couple minutes." So I waited a couple of minutes and I went down the hallway and I tapped on her door and I said, "When you stepped out of the room and slammed the door," that was the behavior, I described it, "I wasn't sure whether you were mad at us or if you were just in a hurry and it slipped out of your hands. Which is it?" There's a long pause. "Slipped out of my hands? Well, make sure it doesn't happen again." And you know what? It didn't. It didn't happen again. I think she liked slamming that door and me carrying that heavy wood door to the other end of the house, but I took the fun out of that. So let's take a look at this. The last one on that page, I think, is kind of a neat one. "You said you really liked the job I did, the behavior. I recorded it. You said you really liked it. But there was something in your voice that made me think you may not like it." That's the first interpretation. Second interpretation, or maybe it's my imagination, though. Second interpretation. "How do you really feel?" Request for interpretation. I love perception checking. The first time you do that, people look at you like you grew a third eyeball on your forehead, but it really keeps the conversation going. So if we're working together in a seminar, I have these that you would script together, those responses. So when a staff member says, "I'm too busy. Besides, I don't think that's my job or responsibility." So you would repeat the comment. "You believe that this may not be your job or responsibility? Is that what I heard you say? Is that because you haven't done this before, or it's because I haven't delegated this task, or anybody else has delegated it to you, or what are you thinking?" So then they will carry on the conversation. That's what we want. The more they talk, the better they feel. Staff member says, "Get off my back about my performance." So you say, "I heard you say that I should get off your back about your performance." Have I been checking in more often that you're like a micromanaging, or is it that I was really too critical and I maybe said it in a way that, hurt your feelings, or what's going on? So they talk more, the better they feel. Staff member agreed to make a change in their conduct or behavior and simply didn't. So you might say, "On this particular date, we met and we discussed this behavior and you were going to change it." Now, it hasn't happened yet. So is that a question of training, or is it a question of willingness to make the adjustment, or what's going on? Oh, I love perception checking. And when you perception check, it builds trust. Now, there's 4 aspects to trustworthiness. That's on the next page of your handout. And that is acceptance. You may not agree with this person, but you hold them in high regard. You respect them. You express supportiveness. You're going to work through it. You believe they have the skill or the willingness or talent to be successful in whatever it is that they're doing. Cooperativeness. This is where we use terms like we, us, and our. And you have cooperative intentions to work together to come up with a mutually satisfying outcome. And then reciprocating disclosures. And sometimes that's empathy. Oh, I can understand how you could feel that way. One time I had to make an adjustment with some new software and I really struggled with it for about a week or so. And I thought, will I ever catch on? And I finally did. It's like any new skill. So you don't top or come up with a worse story or a worse situation. You just blend with the emotions so they feel normal with empathy. And then they'll listen to logic. But we want to make sure we have a foundation of trust, because it makes it a lot easier to engage in conflict, especially when we work on teams. So the most sobering and sad 5 paragraphs I've ever read come out of a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And it says, if we don't have trust in our relationships, then we don't engage in conflict openly and honestly. And then when we don't get our point across or we don't share ideas, then we aren't committed to the decisions that are made. It wasn't my idea. And then we don't hold each other accountable. And then we don't pay attention to the results because we really didn't care. So we got to have that foundation of trust so we can have lively conversations that you can call conflict. And then when we've gotten our point of view shared, we'll be more committed to the result of the decision. And then we'll hold each other accountable and be willing to support the team and the results that we all want to see. We have that same aim, that same goal, and that also builds cohesiveness. Well, when you read through those 5 paragraphs, that's part of your homework. I'd like you to recognize maybe some of the teams you've been on in the past where things went off the rails. Was it that there wasn't any trust, or was it that the conflict just never was that open and honest, or was it that people just weren't committed? But it's amazing how when you read these 5 paragraphs, how easy it is for things to get off track. But it also gives us that entry point to get things back on track. I love that model. And since we're talking about teams, let's talk about where it happens on teams where there's going to be conflict. Now, I'm sure you've seen this, what would you call it, process that teams go through, or the phases of team development, where first it's orientation, who's on the team, what are we trying to deal with, what's the issue, what are the problems, what do we have to work with, do we have a budget, how many people do we have, how much time can we invest? You just kind of get it all out to get an understanding of what the scope is of the reason you're forming a team. Then you start to talk about the agenda, what's going on, and different viewpoints and different perspectives and hesitations and concerns and reservations and vulnerabilities. I don't know anything about that. I have no experience with that. Or, I've worked with other departments that have dealt with this. So you kind of, have that sharing of perspectives. They sometimes call it storming. And then norm emergences. Nobody really uses parliamentary procedures anymore, which was a formal way to handle conflict and discussions. But based upon the personalities of the team members, based upon the culture of the organization, norms are informal rules or behaviors in solving the problems or maintaining relationships. Now, you might be, talking about how to compromise. You might have a decision-making model you're going to try to use. And then someone might say, now, wait a minute, you were concerned about this and you were concerned about that. And you might back up the truck to conflict. And a person says, yeah, I was, because you remember when we talked about it at the very beginning, then they go all the way back to orientation. This is what we were trying to do, and this is what the scope of the project was. Oh, that's right, and so you'll be going up and down these phases like being on an elevator. And it's all right to go back to a previous page, make sure we're all crystal clear on that. But you know what the next step will be. And then at the very end, there's closure, that we call performing, where there's an announcement. This is what we've decided to do. These are the people that are going to do this. This is when we're expecting the feedback to see if it worked. But I want you to feel comfortable with the flow of the conversation. It's orientation, forming, then storming. And then we sometimes have to go back to forming to make sure we're clear. And then we go through, kind of revisiting the conversation. Then we get into trying to resolve and solve the problems and go, does that really match what we were trying to accomplish? And then you might have to back up a little bit. But, I should be able to walk into a meeting that your team is having and within a couple of sentences recognize right away which phase you're in. And you're either going to back up or you're going to go forward, but there's always an outcome. There's always closure. So that's what we will work toward. Now, most people don't want to engage in the conflict. I don't think anybody goes home at the end of the day and say, honey, let's have a conflict tonight. But we have to get more comfortable with it, especially on teams. Otherwise, we deal with something that's called conformity and groupthink. And conformity is the pressure that many people feel to go along with the rest of the group. And you'll see there's a page in your handout here where Solomon Asch was a professor, and he used to draw 3 lines on the board, A, B, or C, and ask his college students which line A, B, or C is about the same length as X. But he would secretly pay the first 10 students to all say C. So they'd C, 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 get to the 11th person that hadn't been paid, and a significant number of times that person would say C. Wondering, misunderstand the question, or is it an optical illusion, or everybody else said C, and so they went with C. And then he'd ask the rest of the class, when you turn in your reaction papers, write down A, B, or C, which is the lines the same length as X. They'd all come in B. It wasn't an optical illusion, but what he found was the pressure to conform, which leads to group think. I call it group stink, and that is the pressure to conform, even if the group's decision is a poor one. I'm always kind of surprised at this. People would rather skip or avoid 2 or 3 minutes of lively conversation or conflict and then just go ahead. They'd rather skip that and be fine with going along with a bad idea for the next 5 years of their career. I wouldn't do that. You want to make sure you get out in the open, have a conversation about it. There's no worry, there's no concern. I mean, if you see something that doesn't look right, there might be another person that sees it that doesn't have the confidence to say, yeah, I don't like that either. So you got to make sure you get it out. And at least if you don't get it out, then we can figure out a way to make the idea better to overcome that obstacle that you, or that challenge that you see. So don't fall for the conformity. And that really does happen during meetings. So good meeting participants know how to get people to participate, and they keep the conversations going. I call those ego boosters, but there's also some ego busters that cause people to bite their tongues. So when you say to someone, I'm glad you brought that up, or that's an interesting thought, let's build on this, let's keep going with this, all of those encourage participation. But when we say things like too risky, let someone else try that first, or we tried that once, it didn't work. That's not how we do it here. We don't have the money and the budget for that, or they'll never go for it. Whenever we hear those no phrases, what I'd like you to do is write those down and then think about what would be a professional, positive way I could respond to that. So the next time that person says that, you have a response. You say, and usually it's a what or how question. What is it about the idea that you think may not work? Or how would you approach it to make the idea better? Or what would you recommend? And so you keep the conversation going. But when people use those no phrases or those ego busters, yeah, I'm sure this has happened to you. You're driving home from work and you think, oh, you know what I should have said? Well, make sure you go back to this handout, find that section and write down what you should have said, because they'll say it again because it worked, to throw a wet blanket on your creativity, but you'll be prepared with a response to keep the conversation going. Fantastic. So all of it comes down to how do you, feel, and how do you react, or how do you participate in conflict is really what we're looking at. So here's your homework. You have 3 pages of philosophies about how to deal with conflict. So it says here in the fine print, the comments listed below can be thought of as descriptions of some of the different strategies for resolving conflict and engaging in negotiation. These phrases reflect traditional wisdom for resolving conflicts and negotiating. Use the scale given below to indicate how typical each philosophy is of your actions in conflict or negotiation. 5, very similar, typical. 4, frequently the way I act or think. 3, sometimes the way I think or act. 2, seldom. 1, nope, that's not me, that's somebody else. But there's 35 philosophies that are listed there. And I'd like you to rate yourself on those philosophies. And then once you've done that, you can transfer those scores to the score sheet, the 4th page on this activity. And it'll line up, whatever you put for number 1 would go under turtle next to number 1. Whatever you had for number 2 would go under shark, for number 2. But it'll give you scores, and you'd be interested in your 2 highest scoring columns. Highest scoring column would be how you first react or respond to conflict. And then the second highest scoring style is how you kind of revert to a second strategy. So your highest scoring style is how you start to engage in conflict, but if that's not working very well, you tend to fall back on, stick with the second highest scoring conflict. So you get to know your style. And it creates these 5 different approaches to conflict. Now, one is a turtle, which is the avoidance strategy. You don't want to deal with issues that create conflict. Don't want to deal with individuals that create conflict. Sometimes we call it lose-lose. Goals not met, relationships are pretty shallow. Then we have people that are sharks. They love to win. It's called the forcing strategy, and everybody else to lose. They think, if there's 8 pieces in a pie, they want 5, you get 3, and you wash the pie pan. And then you have teddy bears that are afraid that the conflict isn't going to be managed well and the relationship will be damaged. They're smoothing in their interactions. This is sometimes lose-win because they give up their personal goals to support that other person, and then they feel like a doormat, or taken advantage of their good nature. Then you have people that are foxes that are willing to compromise. They'll give up a little bit of their goal, persuade you to give up a little bit of the goal. It's kind of partial win-win. Goals not fully met. The relationships aren't fully satisfying. But what we'd like to see is more of a negotiating style, kind of an owl, of course, wisest outcome, that both the issue and the individual is important. Both the content and the relationship is important. And with win-win outcomes, both can benefit. Great decisions and positive relationships. So win-win is based on the paradigm that there's plenty for everybody, that one person's success is not achieved at the expense or exclusion of the successes of others. So the question is then, how do we react to others' conflict styles when they occur? So if you're dealing with someone that's a turtle, I'd like you to sit down with them and be kind and say, I really need to hear what you think and how you feel. Otherwise, you may not get things done and they might not get done correctly. Now you're dealing with a shark. You're just going to have to, speak in I language. I feel, I believe, I welcome your feedback when I'm through. Point out that you believe you're getting farther apart rather than close together. And you would like to come up with a solution where both of you can win. And when they hear the word win, they'll be more open to your conversations. When you deal with a teddy bear, establish a comfort zone. Let them know that you really would like to know what they think and how they feel. Give them a decision-making model and I'm going to give you one in just a short time, a problem-solving formula to follow that's objective, that's kind and caring for the relationship, but we still make a decision. And, it's a better relationship if, we can be that open and honest and solve these problems together. Now with the fox, you're going to have to just simply ask for a little bit more than you expect to get, knowing they'll probably split the difference with you. And then always compliment them on how reasonable they are and how much you appreciate their flexibility. And then when you deal with an owl, well, you're going to need to invest a certain amount of time because they want to find out what everybody thinks and how everybody feels. You want to make sure you have a decision-making model that you share with them. You ask questions, maybe we could do this, perhaps we could do this. Always present your ideas indirectly, kind of like an outside consultant. But always work towards that win-win outcome if you can, or, maybe we're going to have to compromise. So it's great to have some options. Now I've given you some reference information, comes out of that book, Getting to Yes, written by Fisher and Urey. You have about a half a dozen pages that have stories about how to really focus on those win-win outcomes. So one is don't bargain over positions. It's either this or that. Someone's going to win, somebody's going to lose. So there's an example there about someone in an antique store trying to buy a brass dish, just focusing on price, not focusing on quality, not focusing on whether it's a gift, not focusing on any other elements, that would be interests, not positions. Instead of just focusing on price, it'll probably end up damaging the relationship. Then we talk about focusing on interests, not positions. And this is a story about a couple of people in a library. One person wants some fresh air. The other person does not want a draft. The librarian opens a window in another room where there's fresh air without a draft. So that's focusing on the interests, not the positions, not whether the window's open or shut. No, it's the fresh air without a draft. Those were the interests. And then separate the people from the problem. And it talks about that tenant and landlady. I always pay rent when she asks for it. He never pays rent until I ask for it. It's the same transaction, but the relationship is strained. Then there's a story called Invent Options for Mutual Gain of a company that would like to expand, but their property taxes are going up. So they have a fear if they expand, property taxes will go up even more. And then they're courting, trying to get another company to come to their community that could use their products and services, but they're afraid if they find out if property taxes are going up, they're not going to come. So they come up with some creative ideas of how maybe there could be a joint publicity campaign, or businesses that expand, have kind of a tax, increment of improvements or updates, or new businesses that come get a few years before they have to start paying taxes. So how can we creatively come up with something that's more mutually satisfying? And then there's a story about a person whose car was damaged, dealing with an insurance adjuster. And what I'd like you to see with that, insisting on using objective criteria, how many times in that conversation they ask how and what questions. Remember, asking what or how questions as a listener. What, you get explanations and definitions. How, you get examples and descriptions. It's a fantastic example of how powerful that can be. So those are ways that we can work towards win-win outcomes. Now, sometimes we have to address some issues that are a little bit sensitive. So I have this leveling exercise for you that provides you with a framework to have those conversations, to get them started. So the first thing we do, we tell them how we feel. I always want to make sure I set the social tone, whether I'm uncomfortable, I feel a little awkward, or I'm concerned. It can be positive too. I'm excited. I'm really happy about, I want to share with you good news. So you got to set the social tone. And then you describe the behavior that you've observed, whether it's positive or negative, and then the cost, if that continues, or the benefit if it were to change. So here's some examples. You need information from a coworker, because I have a hard time saying peer, to finalize a report you've been working on. That coworker's 3 days late getting the information to you. Now your report's a day late. So you might feel stressed. You might be surprised. You might be concerned. You might be uncertain when this person has provided information 3 days late. because, now your report's a day late and your department is going to get a penalty or fine, or, you're not going to be prepared for the meeting. And a assistant's been gone from the work area more than an hour a day for the last 3 days. Their productivity has fallen off 12%, however you measure that. You might be worried, you might be concerned that you've been away from your desk for, these periods of time, and, other people are answering the phones, or other people are, picking up the work that's not getting completed. And so you just describe the behavior and, how you feel about it, and what's the cost or gain if it were to change. I love that. I had a brother that used to call me Bonehead, and he called everybody else he liked Bonehead. And one day he called me and said, "Hey, Bonehead, want to meet me and play 18 holes of golf this afternoon?" I said, "Corey, I feel uncomfortable when you call me Bonehead. It could damage our relationship." He said, "What?" I said, "I feel uncomfortable when you call me Bonehead. It could damage our relationship." Long pause. "Really?" "Yeah." "Anyway, you want to meet me and play 18 holes of golf this afternoon?" I said, "Sure." Never called me Bonehead again. Didn't realize it was bothering me. It was damaging our relationship. Now, sometimes you have to have a little bit more meat on the chicken. So I have an assertive message formula for you to follow, where you describe the behavior that you've observed, your interpretation of that person's behavior, how that makes you feel. And then you describe the consequences if it continues, and what your future expectations are, or future intentions. And I've given you an action plan to fill out. Now, we had great kids, but every once in a while they'd have a boo-boo. And I would go to my office, I'd fill this out, I'd take a look at the language intensity to make sure it wasn't hostile. I'd come through the family room, I say, "Can you meet me in the dining room? I'd like to talk with you." And then I start out and say, "I love you. Now, I understand that this has occurred. As your parent, I interpret that to mean this. This is how it makes us feel. The consequences of it will be this. Personal expectations or intentions, we don't want this to ever happen again." And usually it wouldn't, because I had a written record. Plus, it showed how thoughtful I was about the conversation. I wrote it down, I scripted it, I invested the time and effort to make sure that it wasn't misunderstood. I love that. So use those. The other thing I wanted to provide you, because I know you have performance reviews that you do occasionally, and maybe a new format that's coming up, and how to provide feedback. So I've provided you 2 pages of content about providing effective feedback. One is always describe behavior. Just like you have the camera and you film that person in action, you describe the behavior. And then always keep it impersonal, always job related. And if you have goals in the department, or you have goals for this person, go back to the goals. That's objective. We set those, and we're getting closer or farther away from our goals. And make it well-timed. The sooner the better. Don't wait too long to provide the feedback, because then they may not be able to do anything about it. Or if it was a big deal, why didn't you say something about it sooner? And then make sure you ensure understanding. "Chris, tell me what you think or how you feel about it." It's a learning opportunity. It's a chance for us to improve. So we should be open to the feedback that we receive. Make sure the behavior is controllable. They can actually do something about it. No sense giving them feedback about it. Maybe there's a technology issue or equipment issue, or maybe there's a timeline issue, or a supply chain issue. And then tailor the feedback to fit this person, what has been their history of success in the past. Maybe there's something else going on because of COVID or the pandemic or other concerns outside of work. We know this: if things aren't going well at work, we tend to drag it home. And if things aren't going well at home, we tend to drag it to work. So it might be some sort of strange event outside of our knowing or understanding. And then always celebrate the successes. Always celebrate the wins together. When they've made the adjustment, we want to make sure we give them the appreciation that they have earned. Now, sometimes we get feedback that we would call criticism, and sometimes we call it negative feedback, or, some people call it constructive feedback, but it sounds kind of negative to me when I get it. But being criticized is hard enough when the criticism is clearly unfair, but it's even a little bit harder to accept when the criticism is on target. So I wanted to provide you some ideas of how to respond non-defensively to criticism. Seek more information. It's foolish to respond to a critical attack until you really understand what the other person has said. After carefully listening to the person's criticism, you might just see that it's valid, in which case you've learned some valuable information about yourself. So be that open-minded. Ask for specifics. Often the vague attack, feels like an attack of the critic, is virtually useless. So it's important to ask some questions and get specifics before you can judge whether or not the information is correct. Guess about the specifics. Sometimes you have to be both the detective and the suspect, and the goal of figuring out what exactly is the crime that you've committed. Sometimes you can paraphrase the critic's ideas. One advantage to paraphrasing is that it's by clarifying or amplifying what you understand the critic to be saying, you'll learn more about the objections. So you're saying this about the performance, or you're saying this about the performance, and you paraphrase it. Ask what the critic wants. Sometimes your critic's demands will be obvious. At other times, you'll need to do some investigating to find out what the critic wants from you. How would you like me to change? Can you provide me some guidance of what that would look like? Ask about the consequences of your behavior. As a rule, people tend to criticize your behavior only when some need of theirs is not being met. So one way to respond to this kind of criticism is to find out exactly what troublesome consequences your behavior has for them. Ask what else is wrong. It might seem crazy to invite more criticism, but sometimes asking about the other complaints can uncover more problems, or maybe the cause, not just a symptom. So probing further can lead to the conversation to issues that are the source of the critic's real dissatisfaction. So you can agree with the facts, whatever they said, that's true. So research suggests that it's also highly effective in restoring a damaged relationship with a critic. If you can agree with the facts, agree when you can. You agree with the critic when the accusations are, factually accurate. Yeah, you're correct. I was angry. Agree with the critic's perception. They can see it that way. It's like one person on one side of a 6, so one person on the other side thinks it looks like a 9, So you believe the criticism is in line. There's a way of agreeing. If you think it's out of line, this is not that with the critic's conclusions, but with their right to see it that way. An explanation might be appropriate rather than apology. So just see if you can acknowledge the validity of the criticism without apologizing. That's another option. Now, I had mentioned that I wanted to share with you a formula to follow to solve problems. I love this one because it kind of flows out of that responding non-defensively to criticism. And what you're really doing in the first part is brainstorming what all the possibilities are. What are the symptoms? What are the causes? What are the inferences? What are the opinions? What are the facts? Will this happen again? You brainstorm what appears to be the problem. And you might have 20 different possibilities of what the problem is. Then you go back and you gather the facts, you discuss the feelings, you double check the opinions, any inferences, hasty generalizations, conclusions that were reached. And then it isn't until step 3 that you restate the one problem you're going to solve that maybe all the other symptoms will disappear. So then you all identify alternative solutions. You do some brainstorming. You take a look at evaluating those ideas, what's reasonable, feasible, financially affordable. And then you implement the decision. But what I love about this is when you implement the decision, you know in advance that you're going to schedule a review of that idea or that solution in action to see how we're going to modify that decision. So you know in advance that you're going to implement, and for a certain amount of time, get the feedback, knowing you're going to come back to that solution and evaluate the results and make necessary modifications. Because you know this, we've had those great ideas, those perfect solutions, and we put them into action, and there's a few things we missed, or there's some unexpected or consequences that we couldn't have imagined. And so I think it takes a lot of the pressure off that we have to have the one correct solution where we're going to put it into action. We're going to put it out and we're going to implement it, see what we get back for feedback and modify it. I love that. Now, sometimes we, have missed the opportunity to handle conflict positively, and we may have damaged a relationship. So I wanted to share with you a repair model that I have found has never let me down in how to restore a relationship that's been damaged. So it's an acrostic, REPAIR. R stands for recognize what the problem is both intellectually and emotionally, to imagine what it could be or used to be like. And then you engage in productive communications. I'm concerned about, have you noticed we don't even say good morning to each other anymore? We used to go to coffee on Wednesdays together. Remember, years ago, we used to be on a golf league Thursday mornings at 6 o'clock. Then you post possible solutions. Maybe we can just say good morning to each other for the next 6 weeks and see if we can restore our relationship to be more civil, more comfortable for each of us. And then you affirm each other after 6 weeks. I really appreciate you saying good morning. I do too. And I think we should continue saying it because I feel like our relationship is better. Yeah, I think so too. So you compliment each other on and what you've done to make those adjustments until it integrates into normal behavior. That becomes the new pattern. But somebody has to take the risk to be that vulnerable, to engage in that productive communication. Hopefully that's you. And I had a brother that I didn't get along with. I applied this repair model. We hadn't talked to each other for 10 years. I'm a communication expert. And now, the relationship is pretty good. We can be in the same room. Everyone's comfortable. I'm comfortable. And I really do, wish the best for him. So it does work. I've used it with accounting firms that were going to, split up. I've used it with family businesses, family farms, and I love the repair model. You count on it, use it. It really does work. So here's a summary of everything we've talked about for the last 80 minutes on one page. So I guess if you're going to have one page that you would laminate and carry around with you, it'd be this last page in your handout. So here are 30 things I want you to keep in mind. Maintain a warm and cooperative tone of voice, and you can do positive affirmations. You can wink at yourself in the mirror. If somebody calls you a jerk, it disappears quickly. So the only thing I've found to guarantee a warm and cooperative tone of voice is to deep breathe. You inhale 5 seconds, hold it 15 seconds, exhale slowly for 10. Do that a couple of times in the morning, a couple of times in the afternoon. It expands your lung capacity. It lowers the pitch of your voice, softens the tone of your voice. You sound warm and cooperative even if you're not. Also, oxygenated blood is fuel for the brain. You've just gone from unleaded gas to jet fuel. You're quicker thinking, more articulate, more vocabulary available to you, and quicker wit just by deep breathing. So do that several times throughout the day. Repeat to yourself, I'm a reasonable person. Sometimes I'll literally write that down in the top right-hand corner of my notepad. I'm a reasonable person, because when people get wound up, when people are upset, they'll try to make me feel like I'm irrational and unreasonable. I just need to remind myself that I am reasonable. Say something that doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it's just like, oh, ooh, ee, go through the vowels. Ooh, that kind of thing. Don't say anything at all. Just remain silent. Let them talk it out. Sometimes people just have to go through that catharsis. Say phrases like this. That's an idea. That's interesting. You've got a point. I call these neutral phrases. Become a broken record. I'll need some time to think about that. Or you've given me a lot to think about. Cover your agenda. I love having an agenda. I love having notes, what 3 things I'm going to cover. If they bring up something else that I haven't put on the agenda, I say, I'm not prepared to talk about that. I'm prepared to talk about these 3 things. We can schedule a time later on this week to talk about that. But today I want to talk about this, so stick to the agenda. Redefine winning. It might be someone you're not going to build a long-lasting, loving relationship with, but maybe you'll be able to have more civil conversations. It'll be less stressful, and other people on the team will be more comfortable. That's pretty good. You want to make being a good listener a priority, so make sure you get prepared physically and psychologically, and keep that open mind, ask questions, and review and evaluate your performance. Never forget to get into that effective listening posture. Squarely face the other person. Tip your head occasionally. Attentive facial expressions. Remove barriers. Lean forward slightly. Make eye contact. Focus your attention. This might be the most important 5 minutes of your day. So you want to make sure you really are paying attention and giving that person as much of your interest as you possibly can. And keep an open mind. They might tell you something you needed to hear that nobody else had the courage to tell you. So sometimes we call this blind paying information. P-A-N-E, not P-A-I-N. And then listen to the content, not necessarily how it's delivered. When people get angry, that's what angry, when people say when they get angry, don't hold it against them. We've all been angry and said things we'd like to take back. So listen to the content, not necessarily how it's delivered. Some people like to use locker room language to see if they can put you on your heels. Use listening noises like I see, I understand, go on. Take notes, then you slow down the rate and speed of the conversation. Then you can provide feedback and verify you have it just the way they told you. But you're more in control of the conversation when you take notes. It limits exaggerations. It limits flat out lying. It eliminates the cussing and swearing, because you're going to write it down and share it with the people that need to hear about it. Provide feedback and verify. That's the goal. When they're angry, don't interrupt. Let them vent. Let them go through the catharsis. Use a person's name then to establish rapport. Karen, I'm so glad you brought that to our attention. I can understand how frustrating this is. So you empathize, blend, and then redirect. This is how we're going to move forward. Then redirect with logic. Ask what or how questions to clarify and resolve the conflict. There's no wrong answers to those questions. A couple of good questions to ask are, what do you mean? Or how do you mean? What do you mean? You'll get the explanations. How do you mean? You'll get the examples. Confirm your agreements in your own words, because you know what your words mean. So make sure you do that. Use I will statements rather than I'll try. I'll try has an escape clause. I will call you at 10 o'clock. I will gather that information and bring it to the next meeting. Use you can statements rather than no. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. I need 5 of these. You can take these 3. I will order 2 more. You can stop by tomorrow and pick those up. We used to do this with the kids. We're going to go see grandpa and grandma. You can go out the front door. You could go out the back door. It sounds cooperative. We're still going, but give them an option. Focus on what you can do. Use will you questions to gain cooperation rather than can you. Can you is a question of competence. Will you is a question of cooperativeness. Can you do me a favor? They say, what is it? Can you? No, I can't. Will you? The response would be, I won't. Wow, that even sounds uncooperative to difficult people. So will you give me till 2 o'clock? Will you share with me some other ideas? Always invite them into the conversation. Set realistic goals. Some of these strategies will work for you and your temperament and personality. Some of them won't, but I've probably shared 100 of them with you this morning. Pick and choose the ones that seem to fit your personality, and it'll get better, and you'll get better and you'll build confidence. It takes time. Got to have a few more conflicts to build up the muscles. Never forget to understand your emotions so you can respond appropriately. All that information simply comes through your senses. It's raw data. It's your interpretation that creates that feeling, but you always have options. And express your best option. Always give the reason first to save time, to make sure we process this accurately, to make sure you get the benefit you're entitled to, but always give the reason first to save time. So that person never has to ask, why do you need that information, or why would I do that? Laugh with them when you can. We used to say, share a laugh, you share a sale. We talked about agree when you can, laugh when you can. And then in 1 minute, I can change my attitude. In that minute, change my entire day. Now, I've timed it. It only takes 1 minute to read one page of my handouts. If you printed this out and read a page a day, I guess it would be about 5 weeks of homework, maybe 7 weeks of homework if you read the promotional material too. But I do believe if you take 1 minute to read one page of my handout each day, it will change the way you'd respond to a customer or coworker that day, or a conflict that day. And the bottom line is, if I was an actor, I get paid to play a role. Guess what? At work, we get paid to play a role. All the characters. I've just given you some of your lines, some of your stage directions. Now all you need to do is play your part. Now, if you ever need any additional information, you can reach me at kit@welchlin.com or kit@seminarsonstress.com. You can go to my YouTube channel that's in my name. There's more than 200 videos there you can watch on different aspects of customer service, handling difficult people, and of course, conflict. You can go to my YouTube channel on seminarsonstress.com. There's more than 50 videos on stress management techniques there. And you can always visit my 2 websites. There's always something new there that we can discuss. So that's the end of my presentation. We have a few minutes. Hopefully we have a little bit of time. And I'm wondering, Natasha, Jessica, is there anybody I need to apologize to? Is there any questions, any concerns?
I don't think any apologies are needed. So, good job.
Oh, thank you very much.
Was not concerned about that. We did have one person ask if your slides would be available.
Sure. Who should I send those to?
You can send them to Jessica and we'll get them out.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that shortly after we're done.
And then we have a question here. How do you best move forward when there is a lot of group thinking and conformity and a reluctance to change?
Yeah. When it comes to change, I always discuss there's 4 stages of it. The first is that change starts with an ending, and people don't like endings. So whenever we change something, it causes people to kind of take a step back, because yesterday when I came to work, I knew exactly what I was doing. So I had competence and I had confidence. Now you're going to change something and I might feel incompetent and I might lose my confidence. So it's more of a loss than the change. It's more of grief sometimes because of the loss of the competence and confidence. And then, we go into a neutral zone. So they know that there's going to be a period of time they can't go back to the way things used to be, and it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable going forward. So there's kind of like nighttime between yesterday and tomorrow, whether there's, tensions are high, stress goes up. Absenteeism sometimes goes up 3 times the normal rate when people are dealing with change, because they just don't want to face it. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to gut it out that day. They'll take, some PTO. But we do need to launch new beginnings. And the key is to have small wins. So the people that were supporters will be, more confident. People that were reluctant will be more willing. And the people that doubted it will be convinced. So we want to break it down into little bitty steps, and then always want to make sure we help people take care of themselves. So help them with wellness, we want to make sure they're well fed, well rested, well exercised, anything we can do to take some of the stress off by providing them strategies, physical remedies, psychological strategies to deal with stress. But breaking from that group is always kind of tough. And so sometimes, I've asked people to just simply take my handouts and use those as objective criteria. So you remember we went to that seminar, I attended the seminar with this guy that said we should, keep this in mind and try to break through that. I'm creating a seminar right now for one of my manufacturing clients. I'm being more innovative in their thinking. And it's all engineers that I'm going to be dealing with in the first round. And they like things to add up. They like things to, tie out. And I'm asking them to think more creatively. And it's going to be really quite a battle because they're very sure of things they know for sure. And so often people have an overconfidence in their judgment. And sometimes we have to figure out a way to break that loose by maybe having some outside resources that we share. Sometimes I ask people if you come across an article that seems to be something that they need to hear, you just make copies of that article, highlight 2 or 3 sentences or paragraphs, because they're not going to read a book. Nobody has time to read a book, but they will read 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then they say, well, I didn't know how we could approach this, but I was thinking about this over the weekend. So you kind of manage up sometimes by doing that. And then people are more willing to have a conversation about it because it wasn't really your idea, it was somebody else's idea. So they don't feel that kind of competitive threat. Hope that helped.
Thank you. We have another question and some people that have said they were interested in the slides. We'll have Jessica send those out to everyone when we send out the evaluation following this session, and as well as the recording. So we'll get all of that stuff to everybody that has signed up for the class today, following in a few days. Usually it will take. We have another one here.
Sure.
It's a question. It says, I have a very physical response to conflict, even conflict I feel well prepared or can quickly handle. For example, when an upset client calls in yelling, even if the issue is resolved within 5 minutes, my hands will shake for the next 30 minutes. Yeah. Any suggestions on how to ease my physical response to conflict?
Yeah, I would go to my website, seminarsonstress.com. You can download 30 strategies for reducing stress. 15 are physical, 15 are psychological, because stress is a physical state, but it's also a psychological state. And I would focus in on the 3 that I like quite a bit, which are positive affirmations, positive visualization, and putting together what's called a past accomplishments reference. So past accomplishments reference is you write down a list of all the conflicts you've had that you can recall that were successful, that you reached agreements that were reasonable, that you handled well, that people said at the end of the phone call, thank you so very much for your help, and I apologize for my frustration and anger, and so you try to remind yourself of those episodes that you've had in the past that were successful. Sometimes you have to put together a past accomplishments reference of everything in your life that's gone well. And I've had people come up with 7 pages, like 175 of them, but we got to start with 25. So you have enough of a reservoir of positive expectancy. And then positive affirmations, and when you say, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. And so what you would do is think about all the positive relationships you have in your life. You have hundreds of positive relationships. I mean, if you text someone and they text you back, you call someone, they answer the phone, and people are happy, to come and see you, or when you come to visit, they light up. You have positive relationships. So there's nothing wrong with you. So you got to remind yourself of that. And then positive visualization. Instead of imagining things are going to go bad, imagine things are going to turn out just fine. When I talk about customer service,
it's really hard to open. Yeah.
Yeah, when I talk about customer service, I always say, make sure you measure performance on what you want, not what you don't want. Thank yous at the end of the phone call. Thank you letters that come in the mail, instead of, people slamming down the phone, or angry emails that you receive. So, kind of a combination of those psychological approaches. So you read your past accomplishments reference. When you get to your desk, you get centered, you review some of those compliments you give yourself, the positive affirmations. And then you just have this expectancy that, I'm really good at resolving conflict. I'm really good at helping people deal with negative emotions and feel better by the time our conversation is over. And if there is an adrenaline rush, you can do some isometrics at your desk where you do some arm curls. You put your arm behind your back, and you stimulate blood flow to other parts of the body, and you burn up that stress response. You burn up the adrenaline blood sugars more quickly. And by doing so, that shaking or the quivering in our voice will go away in just a matter of a couple of minutes, because it takes about a minute for the heart to pump the blood through the system once. So if you do that for a couple of minutes, it'll change the biochemistry, and that adrenaline and blood sugars will be reduced. So have a quick little physical isometrics or stretching or something that you do to burn up that adrenaline rush from that stress response.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we are 5 minutes past, apologize, but the information has been so great, Kit. We really cannot thank you enough for coming. The comments on the sides, everybody is loving everything that you gave us. The handout was amazing. We really appreciate having that to take with us as we go forward. And I'm sure we'll probably be seeing you again sometime because all of the information was wonderful. And I know, having looked at your website many times, that there is a lot of great topics that you do speak on. So thank you so much for sharing this. This has given us a great platform to start going off of and hitting those uncomfortable conversations a little bit more prepared. So we did put in there also, we do have a class that we do train, that our trainers do teach called Crucial Conversations, that fits very well in line with what Kit was talking about today. So we do want to call that out if anybody is wanting a little bit deeper dive into that, to look onto the BHR website to see if that course is something that you might be interested in taking. And again, we have a Training Tuesday session, the third Tuesday of every month. We encourage you to go out and look at the topics that will be coming up in the upcoming months and sign up for any that are of interest to you. If you have any ideas or suggestions, please always reach out to us. We want to keep the content new, fresh, and relevant. So we're always open to ideas. And we thank you for joining us. Kit, we thank you for joining us. Please stay cool in this hot, humid weather that we are having right now. And thank you for everything that you gave us today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure working with you and Jessica and Chastity, and hopefully we'll get a chance to work together again. But if anybody has any questions anytime on anything, I don't care if it's 2 days, 2 months, 2 years from now, I've got a couple of thousand books in my personal library. If this doesn't help, I'll send you the information in its entirety, but it's a working library. So it doesn't take hardly any time for me to track things down and get it to you. So always keep that in mind.
Thank you.
You're very
welcome.
welcome.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Have a great summer.
Thank you. Bye.